Good morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering Agua Mansa Pioneer Cemetery, located in Colton, California. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. Nestled in the shadow of Slover Mountain, the Agua Mansa Valley once stretched in eerie solitude, a fertile expanse where the Santa Ana River carved its way through the land, shaping the fortunes and misfortunes of those who dared to settle there. But the river was never kind. In the mid 19th century, New Mexican colonists led by Santiago Martinez and Manuel Lorenzo Torrillo arrived in search of prosperity. Don Juan Bandini, a wealthy landowner, granted them land on one condition: they would act as a human shield, protecting his domain from raiding indigenous tribes. In return, they would build two settlements: La Pesita on the eastern banks and Agua Mansa to the west. The valley, once nothing more than untamed wilderness, soon pulsed with life. But life in Agua Mansa came at a cost. For a time, the town thrived, farms flourished, vineyards yielded their harvest, and in 1853, the San Salvador de Jurupa Church was erected. Standing defiantly against its elements, it was the first non mission parish in Southern California, and its bell rang out solemnly, a warning against the silence of the wild beyond. But fate had already cast its shadow. When an earlier adobe church in La Pasita collapsed into the quicksand, it was seen as an omen, a whisper from the land that something more sinister waited. Then in 1862, the river unleashed its fury. Now known as the Great Flood of 1862, it was a storm so unrelenting that it drowned entire landscapes. It swept through Agua Mansa, erasing it from existence. The once thriving settlement stood no chance against the merciless deluge. Walls of water tore through its adobe homes, reducing them to ruins, while the river swallowed streets, memories, and lives whole. The town's legacy buried beneath mud and debris, never to recover. A barren ghost of what had once been a beacon of prosperity. Those who survived rebuilt on higher ground, but the town's soul had already been claimed by the flood. Today, few traces remain of Agua Mansa. The Jensen Alvarado Ranch, built in 1870, still stands, a lonely relic of the past, its vineyards once producing thousands of gallons of wine. The church bell, which once tolled in the valley, now hangs in Glenwood Mission Inn, its chime forever severed from the town it was meant to serve. But Agua Mansa is not entirely forgotten. The Agua Mansa Pioneer Cemetery is the last tangible remnant of the once thriving settlement. Designated as California Historical Landmark number 121, it's all that remains of a town lost to time and disaster. The first burial took place in 1852, and the last interment occurred 111 years later, in 1963. The land itself is old, weathered, holding on to memories that refuse to fade. The records of the dead are sadly incomplete. An estimated 2,000 souls they believe rest beneath the earth, with only 1,400 names identified as of 2018. But the markers, like the town itself, have mostly vanished. Only a handful of headstones remain, standing like silent sentinels among the weeds and dust, their inscriptions fading under the weight of time. Louis Rubidoux, whose name would forever be tied to the land he claimed in California, found his final rest here. In 1844, he purchased the Harupa Rancho, securing his place in California's history. Born in St. Louis, Missouri on July 7th, 1796, his journey carried him far from the city of his birth. Like many of French Canadian descent, he ventured west, drawn into the unforgiving world of fur trapping and frontier survival. The untamed landscapes of New Mexico and California became his battleground, where alliances were fragile, enemies were many, and survival was never guaranteed. Ribador was more than just a name on a map, though. His legacy is etched into mountains, towns, and immortalized in history books. The man himself, though, was far more complex than the places that bear his name. In the 1830s, alongside New Mexicans Lorenzo Trujillo, Hipólito Espinosa, and Santiago Martinez, he journeyed back and forth between New Mexico and California, trading New Mexican blankets for Californian horses. The land was lawless, though, at this time, a place where power was seized, not given. California ranchers Lugo and later Juan Bandini, desperate to protect their stock from raiding indigenous groups, recruited these New Mexicans from Abiquiu, offering land in exchange for their protection. But Rubidoux himself did not settle in California until 1844. With his New Mexican wife, their infant daughter, and his young nephew, Luzito, he arrived in Agua Mansa near what is now Riverside. The settlement at the time was growing, but built on blood and bargains, caught between the ambitions of men and the ever changing tide of fate. He was not the only trapper to take root in this contested land. Benjamin Davis Wilson, once a friend of his in Taos, had also come to California. But friendships on the frontier were fleeting, loyalty twisted, and alliances shattered. As land disputes rose, Rubidoux sided against the very New Mexicans who had helped build these settlements. In a courtroom battle that would determine the fate of the Bandini land, Wilson turned on him, delivering a testimony against Rubidoux. This testimony made a permanent rift between the two for the rest of their lives. Wilson would go on to live near Los Angeles, leaving his name etched in the mountain now called Mount Wilson. While Rubidoux' legacy would be tied to a different peak, Rubidoux Mountain, forever a reminder of his presence in these lands. But the political upheavals of the land didn't stop at the courtrooms, they bled into war. When the US Mexican War erupted, Rubidoux found himself caught in a conflict where loyalties were questioned at every turn. In 1846, he called himself a prisoner of war, writing to the US consul Manuel Alvarez from Santa Fe, detailing his experience in the California theater of war. Captured, held as a political pawn, he watched men die around him, knowing his own fate hung in the balance. The battle that sealed his imprisonment unfolded in September of 1846 at Chino Ranch. He and his fellow frontiersmen, including Benjamin Wilson and John Rowland, had planned to join the small American forces in Los Angeles, but they were intercepted by Don Jose Maria Flores, a commander in the Mexican army. Flores led an attack with 200 men, surrounding the house where Rubidoux and his allies had gathered. The house was set ablaze, and after an hour of gunfire, they surrendered, not out of defeat, but to avoid being burned alive. From that moment, Rubidoux wrote, I lost my liberty. The prisoners were nearly marched to Mexico City, a fate that would have almost meant certain death. John Rowland declared he would rather lose a leg than be separated from his family. Rubidoux, remembering the Texans who had perished on forced marches, braced himself for the worst. But fate spared them. A fraction within the Mexican forces, fearing American retribution, convinced Flores to abandon the plan. The prisoners were ransomed and freed on January 10th, 1847, after Commodore Stockton and General Steve Watts Kearny took control of Los Angeles. With this release, Rubidoux resumed life on the frontier. He continued to build his empire, securing land, cattle, and influence, but his days of power were numbered. He died on September 24th, 1868, leaving behind a vast family, a name engraved into California's landscape, and a legacy riddled with conflict, survival, and betrayal. His body was laid to rest in Agua Mansa Pioneer Cemetery, where his grave still stands today, but weathered by time. Yet, like the town he once called home, it remains only as a fading echo of once what was. Beneath the earth of Agua Mansa, where time and history have intertwined with dust and memory, lies Cornelius Jensen, a man who once commanded the seas but found his fate sealed in the land, a Danish sea captain who traded the open waters for a rugged frontier. Jensen's story is one of ambition, reinvention, and survival. Alongside his wife, Mercedes Alvarado, he built a legacy that stretched beyond the decks of his ship. rooting itself deep in California's past. His transformation from mariner to landowner, politician, and vinter shaped the once thriving community of Agua Mansa, a town now lost to time and floodwaters. Though his home, the Jensen Alvarado Ranch, still stands as a registered California historical landmark, the world he once helped cultivate has long since faded, leaving only whispers of a forgotten era. Born on a storm ravaged island of silt off the southern coast of Schleswig in either 1812 or 1814, Jensen grew up with the sea in his blood. He took his mate's exam in Denmark and spent the next 20 years as a captain, his ship cutting through the unforgiving waves of the Atlantic, then rounding the treacherous Cape Horn. He arrived in California by 1844, though he could not have foreseen that his future would be bound to the land rather than the sea. Jensen's voyage took a fateful turn in 1848 when he landed in San Francisco just as the whispers of gold fever began to consume the state. His crew abandoned ship, swept away by the promises of the gold rush, leaving Jensen stranded. With nowhere else to turn, he followed the tide of fortune seekers to Sacramento, setting up a store to sell supplies to miners who hoped to strike it rich. But gold was not in his destiny. It was in Sacramento that Jensen met Ignacio Alvarado, a Californio who urged him to leave behind the chaos of the goldfields and head south to the establishment of Agua Mansa. In 1853, he did just that. At the age of 40, he married Mercedes Alvarado, Ignacio's 16-year-old sister, in the mission of San Gabriel. The Alvarado family was deeply rooted in Mexican California, and through them Jensen found his place among the landowners of the Inland Empire. For a time, life in Aguamansa was prosperous. Jensen became a rancher, vinter, and businessman, establishing a sawmill and store, slowly accumulating wealth and influence. He served as a county supervisor for 9 years, his political power reaching its peak when he was elected chairman of the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors 4 times. He was a man of 3 languages, German, Spanish, and English, and his ability to navigate different worlds served him well. But Agua Mansa was not built to last. The Great Flood of 1862 tore down the valley, swallowing homes, drowning livestock, and leaving behind a wasteland of mud, broken timbers, and silence. The town was never the same. Some were built, but many left. Agua Mansa, once a thriving establishment, had become a ghost town in the making. Jensen, though, refused to surrender. He and his wife moved to higher ground, establishing the Jensen Alvarado Ranch, a massive estate covering hundreds of acres. Their new home, built from kin-fired brick, was the first of its kind in the region, still stands today, a defiant monument to their survival in a land that had tried to erase them. Jensen and Mercedes raised 12 children, of 10 who survived into adulthood. Their sons carried on the family's influence. Yet for all his wealth and power, Jensen could not stop the slow decay of Agua Mansa. The town, once bustling, disappeared piece by piece, claimed by floods, time, and neglect. When Cornelius Jensen died on December 12, 1886, he was the richest man in the region. His fortune wasn't built on gold, but the land he had claimed as his own. But money could not keep him from the same fate as the town he had once called home. He was buried at the Agua Mansa Pioneer Cemetery, where his grave remains one of the few surviving markers, a lonely monument in a field of forgotten names. His wife Mercedes outlived him by decades, passing away in 1914. Today, the Jensen Alvarado Ranch still stands, its walls holding the echoes of a world long gone. But Agua Mansa itself is little more than a memory. The dead remain, their stories starting to fade into the very dust that cover their own graves. Among them, Cornelius Jensen sleeps, his grave untouched, his legacy fading. The town he helped build, now nothing more than a name on a forgotten map. Lorenzo Trujillo, the patriarch of the community, is said to be buried here as well, though no marker remains to tell his story. Trujillo was a man forged on the unforgivable landscapes of the frontier. Born on August 9th, 1794, in Pueblo Abiquiu, New Mexico, Lorenzo came from a lineage of survival. His father, a Janizaro, his mother, a mestiza. He grew up in a world where resilience was not a virtue, but a necessity. In 1840, at the age of 46, Lorenzo set out on a perilous journey that would cement his legacy. With his wife, Maria Dolores Archuleta, and their 7 children, he traveled 1,200 miles along the Old Spanish Trail, crossing mountains, deserts, and treacherous passes to reach Alta California. They were simply not settlers, but pioneers, carving out an existence on the edges of civilization. Lorenzo was a leader among the New Mexican colonists, a founding pillar of the San Salvador Agua Mansa community. His hands built the structures, his blood defended the land. He forged uneasy alliances with powerful men like Antonio Lugo and Juan Bandini, but such friendships were fleeting in a land where survival often came at the cost of loyalty. The land was brutal and so were the enemies. From the shadows of the Cajon Pass, raiders and outlaws descended upon the ranchos, testing the mettle of those who dared to call this place home. Lorenzo was no stranger to violence that lurked beyond the gentle waters of the Santa Ana River. He fought off rustlers, bandits, and war parties. His sons were wounded in battle, their blood staining the dirt that they had fought so hard to claim. Perhaps the most chilling tale of his life was the night he saved the legendary California pioneer Benjamin Wilson. Struck by a poisoned arrow in 1844 during a skirmish with the Mojave, Wilson's fate seemed sealed. But Lorenzo, bound by the unspoken laws of the frontier survival, did the unthinkable. He pressed his lips to the wound and sucked the venom from Wilson's flesh, an act that ensured the survival of one man but sealed an unspoken debt that history would soon forget. By 1855, Agua Mansa had become more than a settlement. It was a monument to struggle and sacrifice. But like all things built on unstable ground, it would not last. The land given to the settlers, known as the Bandini donation, was soon disputed. The settlers who had fought, bled, and buried their dead there were suddenly regarded as squatters. Their homes, their lives, their legacy, everything that they had built was questioned by those who had once welcomed them. Lorenzo Trujillo did not live to see their final betrayal, and perhaps for the best. On April 4th, 1855, he had become one of the first to be laid to rest in the newly established Agua Mansa Cemetery. The town he had helped build would soon crumble under floods, legal battles, and the slow march of time. His grave remains, but the land around him is silent. Agua Mansa has long since faded into history, reduced to scattered ruins and a forgotten cemetery, where time has erased names from headstones, people he had fought to protect, the town he had helped raise from the dust. It's all gone. Yet in the quiet of the Agua Mansa Pioneer Cemetery, one might wonder, does Lorenzo Torrio still stand, watching over the land he refused to surrender? Does he still wander among the graves, searching for the echoes of a town that no longer exists? Some of the names in the cemetery are lost to time, but others refuse to be forgotten. Perhaps the most chilling name among them is Isaac Slover, the famed mountain man and bear hunter who met a violent end. Slover was a man who lived and died by the wilderness, a frontiersman whose legend still lingers in the shadows of Slover Mountain. Born around 1780, he was one of the first American trappers permitted into New Mexico, a land both untamed and unwelcoming to outsiders. From the rigid peaks of the Rockies to the scorched deserts of the Southwest, he carved his name into the history of the frontier, surviving among the fiercest hunters, both human and beast. Sullivan's journey west was written in blood and dust. He was among the first to establish himself in Taos, where the mountains whispered the names of men who lived by the rifle and knife. Ewing Young, William Wolfskill, and James Ohio Patty. He ran with the fur trappers who stalked the tributaries of the Colorado River, braved the shifting sands of the Gila, and hunted the game that would keep them alive in unforgiving land. His path was marked by hardship, prison cells in Baja California, and battles with relentless elements. By the 1830s, Slover had left behind the trapper's life, at least in part. He took a wife, Maria Barbara Aragon, a woman whose name was spoken with warmth by those who passed through their home along the old Spanish Trail. In 1837, they settled in California's San Bernardino Valley. and along with other New Mexican immigrants, helped establish the communities of Agua Mansa and La Pasita de los Tarjillos. To the weary travelers who emerged from the Cajon Pass, starving and broken, Isaac and Maria Barbara were saviors, offering food, shelter, and a place to rest. Tales of their generosity spread, though for Slover, the wild remained his first love. No amount of settlement could tame the fire in his veins. He was a man drawn to the hunt, to the pursuit of something larger than himself. As long as the grizzlies roamed the mountains, he would follow. He called them kebibs, monstrous beasts lurking in the dark corners of the wilderness, waiting for the foolish or the fearless. Slover was both. The old hunter was warned, he did not listen. One fateful day in 1854, high in the wilds of the Cajon Pass, Isaac Slover fired at close range upon a great bear. The shot struck true, but death would not come easy. The beast staggered, crawled into the oak brush, and waited. Slover reloaded his rifle, ignoring the protests of his companion, Bill McMines. He stepped forward, ever the hunter, ever the fool. The grizzly exploded from the brush, its fury unbridled, its revenge swift. Claws tore through the flesh, bones snapped like twigs. Slover was thrown to the ground, his body crushed beneath the weight of the beast he had sought to conquer. The hunter finally met his match. McMines fled down the mountain, breathless, his story tumbling from his lips. A party returned to the site, weapons drawn, hearts pounding. They found the bear lifeless in the brush, but Slover still clung to the last thread of life. They carried him down the mountain to Sycamore Grove, but his fate had already been sealed. His scalp was torn from his skull, his limbs shattered, his body broken beyond repair. He died soon after. No grave marker stands over his grave. The man who roamed the mountains, who faced down nature's most fearsome predator, was buried somewhere at the base of Slover Mountain, perhaps in Agua Mansa Cemetery, perhaps in a place long since forgotten. The land he had called home swallowed him, just as it had taken so many before him. The mountain still bears his name, a silent monument to a man who refused to fear the wild. But the wild does not forget. The hunters of today whisper his legend, a ghost story told beneath the same moon that once watched his final hunt unfold. Some claim his spirit still wander the foothills, a shadow caught between this world and the next, searching for the beast that took his life. Isaac Slover lived by the hunt, and in the end, the hunt is what claimed him. The cemetery remains open for those who seek it. Visitors walk the grounds, staring at the remnants of graves lost to time, stepping carefully between stones that mark the passage of generations. Some claim to hear voices in the wind, a whispering chorus of names long forgotten. Others say they felt a presence, a lingering weight in the air that presses down like the memory of something unfinished. The river may have claimed Agua Mansa, but its dead remain. For generations, the locals have whispered of strange occurrences at the cemetery. Those who pass by at night report seeing a shadowy man walking a dog, both eerily headless, before vanishing into the darkness. Others have heard hushed voices drifting from the empty graves, felt unseen eyes watching them from beneath the crumbling tombstones. But the most chilling tale of all is one that haunted the region for centuries, the tale of La Verena, the weeping woman. Long before settlers arrived at Agua Mansa, her story had already taken root in the lands of Mexico and the American Southwest. Her name was once Matiz, an indigenous woman who lived in the days of the Spanish conquest, but time and tragedy transformed her into something else, something eternal. As the legend goes, La Lorena was a woman of unparalleled beauty, named Maria in many versions of the tale. She fell in love with a wealthy Spanish nobleman who seduced her with the promises of devotion. Together they had two children, and for a time she believed she had everything she ever wanted. But love is fickle. Eventually, her husband grew distant, spending more and more time away from their home. Then one day, Maria saw him riding through town in a carriage, accompanied by a new wife, a woman of high status, more suitable to his noble blood. He barely spared Maria and the children a glance. Overcome with rage and heartbreak, Maria led her children to the river. In her grief, she saw them not as innocent souls, but as burdens that tied her to the life he had abandoned. In one terrible moment, she seized them and plunged them beneath the water, pulling them down as they kicked and struggled until the river carried them away. The realization, though, came too late. Maria collapsed on the riverbank, screaming in anguish, running along the water's edge, hoping to take back what she had done. But her children were gone, stolen by the current, lost to the depths. Some say she drowned herself that very night. Others claim she wandered, wailing for her children, until her body withered and wasted away. But death did not grant her peace. The heavens rejected her, barring her from the afterlife until she could find her lost children. And so Maria became La Lorena, doomed to roam the earth, searching, weeping, forever bound to the rivers and graveyards where the dead linger. At Agua Mansa Cemetery, those who listen closely on moonless nights swear they can hear her, a woman's cry floating on the wind, a sorrowful wail that chills the bones. Some claim to have seen her ghostly form, veiled in white, drifting along the riverbanks of the Santa Ana River. Others tell of encounters more terrifying. Children who wake to find a shadowy woman standing over their beds, whispering their names in a voice like rustling leaves. Those who walk too close to the river at night risk encountering her full wrath. She said to lure the unsuspecting into her sorrowful sobs, drawing them closer and closer until they too disappear beneath the dark waters. Many believe La Lorena preys on children, mistaking them for her own, snatching them away into the night. Parents have long warned their sons and daughters not to wander after dark, for fear that the weeping woman will take them as their own. Even for those who do not believe in ghosts cannot deny the tragedies that have occurred near Agua Mansa, strange accidents, drownings, and disappearances, all tied to the cemetery and the river that runs beside it. The eerie reputation of Agua Mansa does not end with La Lorena. Paranormal investigators and thrill seekers alike have been drawn to the cemetery, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. Some have claimed to see shadowy figures darting between the graves, felt unseen hands grip their shoulders, or even heard whispers on the wind, voices speaking Spanish, calling out names that have been lost to time. Security guards patrol the cemetery on Halloween night, not to protect it from spirits, but from the living. Those drawn by the ghost stories, those who hope to catch the glimpse of the weeping woman herself. And then there's the tragedy of the caretaker. For nearly a year, a man lived alone on the cemetery grounds, tending to the land, watching over the graves. Then one night, he took his own life. Officials have remained tight lipped about the details, respecting the wishes of the family. But some believe that whatever lingers in Agua Mansa drove him to despair, a place where the dead do not rest. The county may try to diminish the ghost stories, chalking them up to superstition and legend. They may hope to bury the fear that surrounds Agua Mansa beneath the historical plaques and museum tours, but the past cannot be silenced. The wind still carries the echoes of forgotten voices. The river still calls to those who dare to listen. The weeping woman still roams, her cries piercing the night, searching, waiting, forever mourning. And if you walk too close to the water's edge, if you listen just a little too carefully, she might just find you. The grave grind for Agua Mansa was a draft latte from Arcade's tasting room. For more honorary grinds in the area, please visit the-grim.com. For now, we're closing the gate on Agua Mansa Pioneer Cemetery. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, subscribe today to join us next time when we open the gate on the Grim.